Hello, everyone, and welcome to this virtual Daring Cities session. We're excited to have everyone here today to learn a little bit more about climate change communications. We're going to be diving into some of the best practices and hear from some amazing speakers across the world. While folks are joining the call, feel free to share your name, your title, and your organization in the chat. We'd love to learn a little bit more about you before we jump into this 90-minute session. And on that, I would love to jump into a little bit about our agenda and some housekeeping items. But first off, I would love to introduce myself. My name is Anne Marie Clary Rauker. I am a Climate Communications Officer for the U.S. Office of ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and I'm actually based in Denver, Colorado. Anyways, super excited to be here as I will guide us through this workshop. We have some great folks joining us on the call. So as y'all know, this is a Zoom meeting, so we have a few housekeeping rules. We would love for everyone to have your videos on if you can. And of course, please keep your mic muted, and feel free to share your information in the chat as well. And if you have any questions for this workshop throughout any the speaker presentations or any moment, please feel free to use that raise your hand feature. And you will find that on the lower bar. It's like the little hand. I'm sure we're all familiar with the Zoom life. Anyway, so for the agenda, we have some of these core elements we're going to be going through, some amazing case studies across the world. So we're going to go through the General Communications 101 case study from the city of Fort Collins. We'll have a really fun breakout room so you can meet your peers on this call. It'll be about 15 minutes. And then we will hear from one of our speakers and learn a little bit more about the narrative for the built environment. And then we'll have a couple amazing campaigns across the world from Hayward to Jakarta, Indonesia. So that will be great. And then lastly, we will be ending with the ingredients of a communications plan. And on that note, I will switch to the next slide to share our list of speakers. Awesome. So we have some amazing speakers here with us today. They'll be joining us live. Some of you will see them in the breakout rooms, which will be great. And then some of them, due to time zone constraints, have submitted some amazing recorded videos that we will go through and kind of break down some of the amazing information you find in there as well. So I will run through the list of speakers now, but you will hear from all of them today. And apologies ahead of time if I mispronounce anyone's name. Feel free to correct me later. So first off, we have Angela Penier, a senior sustainability specialist from the city of Fort Collins in Colorado. Then we have Ben Walker, who is a strategic communications lead from the Louds Foundation. Nicole Grecki, a senior sustainability specialist from the city of Hayward, California. Asap Kusanto, the head of the Environmental Agency of Jakarta, Indonesia. Melody Azur, Department Head and Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Officer from the city of Luxembourg, Philippines. Rodrigue M. Abache, from the city of Luxembourg, Philippines, and he is a project development officer as well. And last but not least, Ariel Dakovic, the head of global communications at ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability. And on that note, I will pass it over to Ariel to start us off.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Anne Marie. Love to see where everyone's coming from and what a diverse crowd we've got. So thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. So I get the honor of starting us out today and just looking at, where everyone's coming from, what you're doing. And even what time it is. So, good morning to those of you who it's morning time, and good evening to those of you who are really calling in from some of these later time zones. So thanks for joining us. So some of you might be really fresh to climate communications and communications in general. And some of you might be old hands. And I actually do see that there are quite a few folks who are in the communication space. I'm really happy to be joined by you. And I hope you'll be sharing also maybe some of your insights, both in the chat, but also in the breakout rooms. And if you have things to add, please do feel free to raise your hand. As Anne Marie said, that we hope this is quite interactive. But no matter where you're coming from, I think that that communications is a part of everyone's job. So I am just really lucky. I get paid to do this all the time, but I think that it's really important for everyone who's working, especially in climate, because obviously we have a huge job ahead of us that communications becomes a part of your job description. So no matter where you're coming from, I just want to have you take a moment to think about a climate related problem you're trying to solve. This might be one at home. I would think, basically at our house, we're trying to fly as little as possible. So what does that problem look like? And what are the possible solutions for that? Maybe it's in your city, maybe it's in your country. So think about a climate related problem, and we're going to come back to this. And basically, I guarantee whatever that problem is, there's a communications angle to it. So that's kind of what we want to take apart today. So I just want you to keep that climate problem in mind. And with that, I'm going to move on to kind of my background slides with this first piece, which is the communications equation. Again, if you're a communications professional, you might have seen different versions of this, but I think this equation just really captures kind of anytime you are going about a problem that has a communications element, these are at least 5 of the elements you should be thinking about. And again, I think that if you really engage with any of these elements in any kind of serious or repetitive way, let's say, so you sort of make a guess or a guesstimate and then try to inform yourself about whether or not that guess was correct, you're going to be doing better than most, and you're going to be more successful than you would be without doing these things. So I do think that this is a really handy way to think about it. So first of all, we start with the goal. And so what is that you're trying to accomplish with that problem that you're thinking about that you just got in your head? What exactly would success look like? And for climate communications, that often looks like either raising awareness about an issue. It might be providing understanding about a complex topic. It might be persuading someone to feel a different way about something. It might be bringing someone to care about a new element of that of the issue you're working on. And ultimately, we're trying to get people to act. So those are kind of the main maybe action words or goals you might be looking at for climate communications. Audience is the next element. One of the things that we definitely chant in my office is that there's no such thing as the general public. You really want to try to get as specific as you can about your audience. So the farther you drill down into your audience, the more successful you're going to be. If you are thinking about mobility in your city and you just want to reach out to all residents with a message, is that really the audience you want to reach? Or do you want to actually think about folks who are currently own a car and are thinking about getting a new car? So now you've narrowed the audience to a much more specific group, and ultimately maybe that's the group you really want to get the information about your subsidy on electric charging wall boxes, for example. So really, don't let a technical person, not to point fingers, but let's say someone comes to your office and says, I just want as many people to know about this as possible. Don't let that be the final answer, because I think that that we can get more specific. The unique value proposition is really asking the question, what is special about the thing that we're offering? And if you can't actually figure out what that is, then maybe you need to go back a little bit to the drawing board and either refigure it a little bit, but usually there is some kind of special kind of niche that you could be addressing. So is this the first time that something's been offered? Is it the biggest mobilization? So something that can kind of grab attention or really cue your audience to want to care about what you're offering. Channels is the next element. So where is your audience? So you've already identified who your audience is. where is your audience already? So, those are the places that you want to find them. Who do they listen to? This one is so great for climate communications because we have so many opportunities to think creatively about who people are influenced by. And most of the time, that is not climate scientists. So, here, getting creative about who your influencers could be, it can be really exciting. I recently heard a presentation from a mayor who got their local ice hockey team to become a carbon neutral ice hockey team. And so they got the ice hockey players. This was in Finland, of course, ice hockey, a big deal, to talk about being carbon neutral. And that's a really unexpected but effective influencer. And he was really psyched about that opportunity. And then finally, the last element is insights. And I think insights is a little bit of a catch-all here, but I think it is really great when we find out, okay, this is something that an audience, here's a problem that an audience has, and they're always solving it in the same way, and that way isn't working. That's an insight. And so how can we use that insight to make our communications more relevant? So those are the elements there. I will stop there, and we can skip the next slide because we're going to come back to that one, and I will turn things over to Angela. Or I'm sorry, I'm actually turning it over to Anne Marie first. Is that right? Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, next up, we have an amazing case study from the city of Fort Collins. Angela, please feel free to take it away and share your amazing insights. For everyone on the line, though, please note we'll have about 10 minutes of Angela sharing, and then we'll have 5 minutes for live questions. Thank you.
Maybe while we're waiting for Angela, I could pop back in here with some thoughts on audience, because that was the other piece that I skipped over there, and we are going to get back to audience. But one of the things I did want to say about audience is meeting people where they are is super important. So it's not just, kind of defining types of audience. I'd mentioned someone who's buying a new car, or you might be thinking about age or location. So those are kind of defining characteristics, but also your audience might be on a journey with you, and they might not even be aware that they have a problem. And so tailoring your communications towards where they are on that journey is really important. So hitting, someone with something that is further down the journey than they're ready to be won't resonate as much as if you meet them where they are. And some of the campaigns that I'm going to share a little later on from our colleagues in Southeast Asia, I think they do a really great job of recognizing that folks are really along this scale of the journey. And I'm also going to share what we did at ICLEI to address a particular audience journey for an entirely new brand. So we'll come back to this slide and explore it a little bit more. Is Angela ready now? It looks like Angela's finding a spot for herself outside.
I think I'm as ready as I'm going to be.
Great.
My apologies.
This is a great setting for talking about
outside,
climate.
Right?
Yes.
My apologies for that mishap. Well, thank you for having me. My name's Angela Pena, and I'm with the city of Fort Collins. I'm a senior sustainability specialist here at the city in environmental services. A piece here that I wanted to present on was what my manager likes to call a suite of services that we offer here at the city under our Climate Future community partnerships programs that we have. We have city-led and co-led and community-led, and under this suite of offerings, we have our community consultants programs and community leadership grant program and a climate equity committee that we just started a pilot year this year. And in that, right, we're trying to communicate out to folks in the community about these programs in those different settings. And even though we like to look at the traditional frameworks, I like to or this is what I'm calling the and factor. So with those added considerations of using, right, the traditional framework of what's the purpose, you know, who do we want to communicate with, how will the message be sent out, and, you know, how will we communicate that out via platforms that we use, and then who's responsible. Here at the city of Fort Collins, we have a centralized department that usually sends out our communications. That being said, in our department, knowing that it's very important to get the climate message across, we have a cohort of colleagues that work together in waste reduction and recycling, and climate, and air quality. So we try to work together to make sure that we can carry some of that messaging across the teams together, versus trying to do that targeted individual piece, because as we know, a lot of times when we're trying to communicate out to residents, a lot of times they get overburdened with that communication piece coming from different, when essentially the message is pretty much the same. So for me, knowing that I wanted to hone in and really put that and factor, is knowing that when we do talk about who is our audience, knowing that we typically have a baseline audience. So that would be the folks out in the community that are, you know, in the movement, doing the work, and, you know, they're already pretty much engaged. So that communication piece would look very different from folks that are still trying to dip their toes in the whole climate, the climate movement. So knowing that we're going to have to meet folks in different places. So there for me, again, that and factor, knowing we have a baseline, but then what are those added communities or communication pieces we have to consider as we're reaching out to other communities. And then going back to knowing that we have a centralized communications department. We know that in the messaging, we want to make sure, especially when it comes to climate, we want to make it personal and make that day-to-day connection for folks, right? So then that helps really have some accountability for them, and also kind of nudges them and pushes that behavioral change. We also have a program that we really try to lean on for that behavioral change piece to help, you know, elevate some of that work that folks are probably already doing within their homes and even at work, and, you know, just elevating it. So we know that we want the message to be communicated in many different forms. So here at the city of Fort Collins, we use Facebook, Instagram, and then that and factor for us, for a lot of a lot of us folks that are out there engaging with community members directly, knowing that we also have resources like WhatsApp, and even, you know, having a few hard copies in hand, and knowing that this may happen whether we're attending events that is of our own making, or if we're invited, and knowing that we're there to support. So that may look very differently. Are we trying to inform folks at the event? Are we trying to engage them? I think one thing that our cohort really came together was, what do we want that interaction to look and feel like? So knowing that in communications, you would hope it would be reciprocal. So knowing that we are also offering information, but we're also taking information from folks. And I think too, I think it really shows if you're meeting the mark or you're somewhere in between, as to, you know, how many residents are showing up to your event. You know, I think that kind of gives you a glimmer into maybe you need to elevate some of that communications piece. And for us, we're really proactive. Our motto is to plan ahead. We usually have a Gantt chart that we look at and say, okay, these are coming down the line a month, 2 months ahead of time. We usually try to get communications requests in before then. And then we have a set mark date. And then we also have impromptu events that folks may invite us to, and, you know, we like to jump on those as well. So it varies, but knowing that we usually try to keep that, you know, that model of just planning ahead. Things could come into that, and we want to have enough time to adjust. So again, for us, CPIO that I mentioned earlier, so our centralized location for communications here at the city. And then knowing that just as department reps, we also it's a team effort. So we work together. So that's our baseline. And then we also consider as a cohort, what are those other pieces or that and factor that I mentioned earlier of, okay, we know we have our baseline. We still have other places that we can really dig into and communicate a little better. So definitely, again, just always have that in consideration. And I think overall for me, the goal is to, metrics and numbers, and that is all fine and well, but the goal is to reach the folks where they're at. I think you've probably heard that as well in this and community communications and in engagement. And then, right, our message overall is just we're in this together, especially when it comes to climate action, climate change, and it's just getting that connection with folks to say, we need your help. We can't do this as an entity. The city of Fort Collins cannot do this alone. We have to do this as a whole community. So just that inviting piece of help us do this together in a good way. So just definitely knowing with our commitment to equity and resilience, knowing that we try to key in those different factors of the different nuanced communities within Fort Collins. So with that, I'm finished and thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angela. I really liked the and factor. I guess I was muted. Apologies there. Hello. Thank you so much, Angela. I really appreciate everything that you shared, and I really like the language you used about the and factor. I will like to let the audience know that now is a great time. If you have any specific questions for Angela, you're welcome to raise your hand or put your question in the chat. I know, Angela, we have you for about 6 more minutes, so I'd love to capitalize on that time with you being here. And I'll give folks like a moment to kind of think about their questions if they have any, or put them in the chat. But I have a question for you, Angela. And I was wondering, like, as you're going throughout any of like your community engagement programs, maybe it was like a workshop moment, was there anything that surprised you that worked really well for your community?
I think for us, it was definitely thinking outside of the box. We really revel in the times when we're invited, right? We talk about building relationships. So a lot of times when folks out in the community are having their own events and we're invited to just show up and support, that's right. A message, at least in my perspective, of like, we trust you, we want you to be here with us. And then I believe, like, I feel good about the message that we've communicated on our end of letting them know we're here to support. How can we support one another? So yeah, it makes me feel good when I know that that's reciprocal part comes in from community members.
Absolutely. I love that. I think it's so important to have that relationship and meet people where they are and provide those incentives, because it's all really about, trust building and credibility and continuing that ongoing relationship with community members. And then I don't see anything else in the chat or folks raising their hand yet, so I'll keep asking you questions. So I'm a huge fan of the City of Fort Collins newsletters. So I would love if maybe you have your top, like your favorite one, if you could at least speak to about like the different types of newsletters, and maybe highlight one of the highest engagement newsletters you've had and what made it, in your opinion, have that level of engagement.
In our newsletter, we usually try to cover all the different areas that we're working on, right? So I think a big part of was probably our promotions and our waste reduction recycling team working on our plastic bags ban here. So it was a good turnout. We had so much interaction with communities out there, and putting it out there and knowing that it's going beyond just our regular internal newsletter and folks that are out in the community that are subscribe to that, knowing that we had a good turnout and the community really banded together and worked, and we had a good outcome, and folks just jumped right on and started using their reusable bags and cloth bags, and that was a really great and awesome collective effort that went across the whole city together, and with the help of our newsletter as well.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I would definitely encourage anyone on the call here to check out the City of Fort Collins website. They have a bunch of amazing newsletters, and I believe they're available in Spanish as well, which is like really great to reach, different residents in your community. And for my last question for you, Angela, I would love to hear if you have any communication resources you'd like to share with folks on the line. Maybe it's some free resources that you like to use, or some great blogs to read to stay up to date on the most effective, engaging communication methods.
For me, we have, like I mentioned earlier, our CPIO folks, so really leaning on those folks. So yeah, I lean on the resources internally to me. So definitely, if I have a question or I'm leaning towards, does this look right? Just always leaning on colleagues in that internal piece. They have great resources and links to offer, and videos if you want to double check yourself. So I'm one, right? I reach to the closest person next to me. So they have a wealth of knowledge, and I usually try to really, use that to my advantage.
Amazing. I love that. Thank you, Angela. I agree. There's the power of knowledge sharing and connecting with your peers and folks across the world, like we're doing today, to share these best practices and examples. So thank you so much for your time, Angela. Have a great day. Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone. So next up, we're going to jump right into our breakout room. As I mentioned before, we'll be in these breakout rooms for about 15 minutes. Don't worry, we'll give you notice when they're about to close. So we have these 3 questions that we want everyone in your breakout room to go through. Everyone will have a facilitator in there. Depending on the numbers, it may be best, again, to use that raise your hand feature, but we'd love for everyone to, quickly introduce yourself, where you're from, what your role is, then name a goal for your community related to climate change communications. And then if you could define success for that goal, what would it look like? What do you think it would be? You could get very specific into key performance indicators, or stick with a kind of a broad idea of what success would look like. So on that note, we will transition to the breakout room, and we'll come back to the main session in 15 minutes. Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Hi, everyone. Welcome back from the breakout rooms. I think we'll give it a few more moments for folks to join us. But if you have any fun insights you'd like to share with everyone in the main session, please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. I know in my breakout session, we had a great conversation about the holistic approach with sustainability, and really talking about utilizing the language of cost benefit analysis, and kind of diving into how do you make a case for sustainability initiatives to different stakeholders, and the power of language. So it was really riveting, great conversation. So thank you to the folks that were in my breakout room. And yeah, if anyone wants to add in, items in the chat that you want to kind of share with everyone else that you talked about, that would be great. I will give it probably another minute or so. It looks like some folks are still in their breakout rooms. Awesome. Thank you, Petra, for sharing. I see that you said, I love that we have 3 different countries discussing climate communication problems. Oh, I bet that was a fascinating conversation. Awesome. Great. Thank you, everyone, for engaging in the breakout rooms. I hope everyone had a great time, great conversation. We will move on to our next section. So on the next slide, I would love to introduce Ben from the Louds Foundation. So today he will be speaking about a new narrative for the built environment. And on that note, Ben, feel free to take it away.
Thanks, Marie. I'm just going to share my screen. which I think, hopefully, all being well, everybody can now see. Kind of looking
Perfect.
to you, Anne-Marie, for a yes. Yes, thank you.
Yes, I see. I can see it.
So, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are residing at this moment in time. Thank you to Anne-Marie and to Ariel for the invite, and thank you to ICLEI and to the Federal City of Bonn for hosting these talks on daring cities. Briefly, I'm Ben Walker. I'm Strategic Communications Lead at Louders Foundation. I'm going to talk to you for about 15 minutes about the work we've been conducting with our partners, 89up and Demos Helsinki, more on them later. And it's to analyse the most compelling narratives for a just transition of the built environment. And in the spirit of being a bit daring, I'm going to give you a sneak peek on some top line insights that I received only on Friday. So daring is such a great word and great framing for what we do at Louders, because we're really daring to dream towards a world we want to live in. And we've got incredibly ambitious targets. So Louders is now 4 years old, and we work through business and industry to redefine value and change the economy so that it's a force for good. We're pretty unique in terms of climate foundations, I would say, in that we look at the dual crises of climate change and inequality, and we vehemently believe you cannot change one without the other, and vice versa. So our built environment programme specifically works with around 50 partners in Europe. It represents an envelope of roughly the same amount in millions of euros of grant funding, and it's split into 3 areas. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just for the benefit of the slide. First is creating policy frameworks with the explicit aim of delivering decarbonisation, and then encouraging industry to align within those frameworks. The second is ensuring that the climate transition is just and that no workers or communities are left behind, something that I think everybody on this call would agree with. And then the third is getting finance and industry to scale behind this transformation. We've seen some notable successes in the past 12 months. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but kind of top line, just a couple of things I wanted to pull out. This time last year, the European President, Ursula von der Leyen, actually spoke about bio-based construction in her State of the Union. We've moved on quite a bit since then, but that was a big deal for us. Our partners will also help map out the road to decarbonisation at national and European-wide levels through their building life roadmaps. And in finance, we're increasingly seeing more and more asset managers use carbon measurement tools to align with Paris 2015 framings through tools that we work with our partners. So these are like really big achievements in the world of policy. But while we've kind of been patting ourselves on the back a little bit, all in our bubble, no one else really seems to be talking about it. And I think this is a really indicative slide to show that. So it's not all that scientific, but it represents the amount of mentions for the built environment and transition, so climate transition, versus transport and transition in the UK press for the 12 months preceding June this year. So from May 2022 to June 2023, that's what it looks like. And what strikes me about it is they're two similarly complex industries that often are represented by 2 government departments or 2 subdivisions of a city government. But one is being talked about nearly 3 times as much as the other in the media. Now, at Louders, this felt really strange to us because buildings, they're the world's biggest asset class. They're responsible for nearly 40% of carbon emissions and a workforce in construction of around 30 million people in Europe. So there's a worldwide housing crisis, and millions are either without a home or living in substandard accommodation. And if we can't transition our built environment, we're not going to get the just transition in the world that we want to see. And for me, it's probably best summarized in this quote by a man who probably certainly divides opinions these days, I would say. I think we can all agree had a way with words. What's particularly noteworthy about this line is that it was said in 1941 when London was suffering its biggest buildings crisis to date, which was the Blitz. We now have what I would put to you a postmodern buildings crisis, where buildings are seen as commodities instead of the places we live, work, and raise families. We have a housing crisis, but the only policy that seems to cut through is to build more homes at a rate which would vastly outstrip our carbon budget. And most of all, no one's really talking about it. Instead, they seem to be talking about cars. So from May this year, we started working with Demos Helsinki, who are a progressive think tank, and 89up, who are Europe's first impact communications agency and based here in London, on defining a new narrative for the built environment. And as you can see from the stats on the slide, it's a pretty significant study, and we think probably the first of its kind, although I'm sure there'll be somebody in the chat that will correct me. But looking at this, it looks at both two verticals of stakeholder and citizen data, feedback and polling. So the stakeholder work came first. And what did we learn? Well, a lot of it was not a surprise. Stakeholders identified some significant paradoxes, I would say. We found there was narrative tensions, which were proving to be obstacles in moving the conversation forward. So there was a real range in understanding the size of the problem, from it being oversimplified to it being seen as so massive it was not viable and we couldn't do it. There's an emerging just transition argument, which you can have the either or, so it's decarbonisation or equity, not the intimate and interconnected link between the two that we vehemently believe at Lauda's Foundation. Industry continues to be the biggest lever, but industry is not working hard enough to support the transition and often looks at short-term gains and not taking the risk of being the first adopters. And all that has a cumulative effect, which means everyone's not going to be ready for 2050. We're focusing too much on the short term. We're not thinking about the supply chain in the built environment, and we've got a lot of work to do. So combining this feedback with the media evaluations, and that includes the graph I showed you earlier versus housing versus transport, the team at 89up were able to distinguish between red narratives, which you should see on the left hand of your screen, and those are their kind of blockers to progress or things that activated people which they thought were unhelpful, those kind of trigger words, and then the green narratives, which were seen as progressive areas for opportunity, things you should talk about in your communications that really excite people and get them interested. These green narratives then took the form of 3 dummy narratives that were loosely shaped around the areas of pragmatism, futurist, and then security and inequality, which I do think personally is the most interesting because it brings together quite disparate political bases, you know, those that are very keen on national security versus those that are keen on family unit security. Also, there's a lot of commonality with thinking about how you should be equal and minimising lack of comfort, for example. So without boring you on the methodology too much, we've just come out of the field with those. We had a sample of 2,000 people. They were grouped into 4 groups of 500 each. One group, which is our baseline group, were given no narrative, so they didn't see any of these. But then each of the other 500 strong groups read one of these narratives and had this narrative. And then they all answered the same set of questions about the built environment to gauge how the different narratives would impact the same groups of people differently. So we've got a baseline and then a variation from the mean. And here's the top line results. So it's a bit daring in the Daring Cities theme because we aren't really releasing anything until the end of the month, at least, I would say. But here's a first look for all of you. So the good news, the first thing to say is that all the narratives resonated in all our countries. So we were 10 countries and all the narratives, everybody that read a narrative reacted positively. And that really, I think, gives credence to the framing that not doing anything in the climate crisis is no longer an option. And it also shows those naysayers that we in comms and marketing on the call do actually have jobs that make an impact, I think. However, what was also pretty universal was that the overall changes needed. People felt they were perceived as too complicated and urgent for individuals to take responsibility. So this harks back a little bit to what I was saying before, where the stakeholder feedback and where the problem was perceived as too big. It was the fixing up of the pragmatic narrative which resonated the most, though. So on average, respondents were more likely to agree with it is what they should believe should happen and that it reflects values they believe in. The UK, Spain and Romania particularly over-indexed on the pragmatic narrative, I should say. And it's not perhaps that surprising, as it's the least radical, and there's probably enough there for most people to see something that they agreed with. However, we also heard from NGO stakeholders last week who were looking at this narrative, actually said this work wasn't radical enough and it would be difficult for them to build a policy platform on. So one to think about. So I think they'd be more interested in the futurist narrative, for example. And there is an audience, and particularly actually in France and Spain, who are more likely to agree that politicians should get on and do it. So the Spanish were also least likely to care about the cost, interestingly enough. But to show the difference across Europe, in other countries such as Czechia, the Netherlands, respondents were also more likely to question if this was technically possible compared to other narratives. And in some quarters, it wasn't seen as inclusive. And finally, the most interesting one, as I mentioned, inequality and security. It came second overall if we were going to rank them. And it was actually top in Italy and the UK, where respondents were more likely to agree that it was what I believe should happen. Indeed, these countries significantly over-indexed against the rest of Europe, so they really were the outliers. My initial thought was maybe this is a political one, and that it was a reflection of more libertarian values in those countries in comparison to other countries in Europe, but actually it didn't really bear out when you dig into the detail a little bit. So left-leaning Romanians also really like this narrative as an indicative example. So where next? So to use a metaphor, which I know is statistically more impactful than housing, transport, we're on a journey. So imagine we're on an electric bus. And Louders is possibly the bus company, I'd say, maybe not the conductor, maybe the conductor, but not the driver. We're getting everyone on that bus in the same direction with a couple of key stops coming up. This starts in New York, and many of you know it's New York Climate Week this week. And at the end of the week, there's a group of NGOs and philanthropies we're going to meet. They're meeting for the second time to discuss how we can change the game in the built environment transition. And this work's going to be part of that discussion. COP's going to be a stop to refuel, as you can see I've noted there. And it's going to be a good opportunity to test out some of our narrative learnings, develop our messages at that event. But the destination we can see at the end of the line is Paris on the 6th and the 9th of March. And President Macron, and apologies to those French nationals on the call, it's a very quick South Park-like character I've put together there, but he's going to be hosting a series of climate conferences, the Global Forum on Buildings and Climate, for your diaries, and that's co-organised by the UN Environment Programme. And at those sessions, we'll really be looking for a buildings breakthrough moment where the philanthropic, resource and narrative arguments I've touched upon come together, reinforce a policy announcement which has worldwide recognition. So we've still got a long way to go, but I really believe this new narrative could be the fuel which drives the success we need. Thanks for listening. If you want to find out more, if you want to have a conversation, if you want to jump on the bus, all my details are there. I'll stop there. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate you sharing the most recent stats about narratives with us. And well, hopefully I'll get on that bus together. Awesome. With that note, I will move us on to our next session or section of the session. So we're going to jump into showcasing some amazing campaigns that motivate action. So we have a couple from across the world, but we're going to start with Nicole from the city of Hayward in California. So Nicole, feel free to take it away.
Thank you. I'll wait for the slides to come up, but in the meantime, I'm Nicole Grecki. I am the Senior Sustainability Specialist with the City of Hayward. Been there for about 5 years now. And there we go. So for those of you who have joined us today and maybe never heard of Hayward before, I did want to provide some background on our city and community to kind of contextualize some of the communications that we do. There we go. So Hayward is in the Northern California Bay Area, the land of the Ohlone people, and we have a very central location that you can see on this map, which led to our kind of tagline of Heart of the Bay. Hayward has a population of 160,000 people. That is very diverse. If you can, good, thank you. So the ethnicity breakdown is on the screen, and as you can see, it's about 40% Latinx, 30% Asian or Pacific Islander, 16% white, 9% African American, and 4% that identify as 2 or more races. As you might imagine, with a diverse community, we also have many languages that are spoken in our community. So the data on the screen is from our 2019 American Community Survey data, which shows that 60% of our residents speak a language other than English at home. And that breakdown is on the screen with the primary languages being used at home, Spanish and Chinese. So all of these things greatly influence how we communicate with our community. And so the project that I wanted to focus on today as a case study is the city's Climate Action Plan, or CAP. And so for the past 2 years, we've been updating our CAP, which was originally published in 2009. We updated it again in 2014. And our current update that we're doing is to set us on a pathway to reach our 2030 greenhouse gas emission goal. So what were Hayward's communication goals when it came to the Climate Action Plan? If we can go to the next slide, please. In short, it was extensive community outreach and applying a racial equity lens early on in the process. So expanding on that, for the Climate Action Plan, we also did this update alongside our housing element, environmental justice element, and safety hazards element, because housing, climate change, environmental justice, and resiliency to climate change are all very interconnected. And we wanted those interconnections to be recognized. When we set out this, our RFP to consultants to work on this, we stated that implementing a racial equity lens throughout the earliest phases of this project will ensure that the city engages with all segments of the community and that the proposed updates do not disproportionately impact communities of color. And for community engagement, our goals were to involve, collaborate, and empower the community to act through the process, and that special attention should be given to communicating information that it is accessible and easy to understand. So how did we do this? We did all the things that are pretty typical in local government outreach. We hosted public workshops over Zoom. We created an online survey. We posted the survey on the website. We did an article in our e-newsletter. We posted on social media. We also went out to outreach events and tabled, asking community members to complete the survey to get feedback for a freebie like a kitchen compost pail or a reusable bag. But given the city's demographics, we also wanted to try some new out-of-the-box outreach ideas to really tailor the message to our community and get more community engagement that we typically see. And in particular, reach the audience that isn't already engaging with the city. So whenever we have these outreach events or have city council meetings, we're hearing back from the same people. They're usually organized groups like the Sierra Club or Save the Bay, which is very important, and we want to have their feedback, but we also want to hear back from the residents who don't come to city council meetings, that maybe don't speak English, but are going to be equally impacted by the policies and programs that are outlined in this plan. So one example was we hosted a gallery with posters in both English and Spanish, providing background on the project. On the left is a photo of it set up in our library. And for this, we wanted to create a very visual infographics with lots of color. They were intended for residents who may not have any background on the projects, maybe don't know what a housing element is, don't know what a climate action plan is, but wanted to provide just enough details and insight and relevance to their lives to get them interested and engaged. And so this was the first outreach event we did. As I said, we had posters up in our library for a few weeks. We then moved them to City Hall. We also let people borrow them. So we brought them to AC Transit, which is our main public bus transit provider. And then they were also taken to the NAACP regional offices where we hosted an event. We would also flyer at the farmers market, at BART stops, which is another public transit, kind of our subway equivalent, and outside grocery stores and laundromats, really aiming to get as much initial engagement from this project as possible from people that don't come to city council meetings. And during this initial phase, we had one ask and we had an online QR code on everything that we were asking residents to tell their housing story. This was really well received, and we received a lot of great feedback that helped shape our housing element. So phase 2 of the community engagement was working with a local community college. We had grant funds to work with the community college for both the housing element and climate action plan. This is a model that the city's used previously and has a proven track record. So in particular, we work with a group of English professors who teach first-year English at Chabot College, a course that almost every student takes. And kind of how this partnership works is city staff works with the professors at Chabot, and we kind of craft and create a survey, which then the students, as a part of their course, must then go interview using the survey questions 10 residents. So these students are doing background research, plus they're doing interviews and getting insights on those interviews, and then creating a paper that's a policy recommendation for the city. So for students, they get to build communication skills, public speaking skills, research skills, putting it all together skills, writing skills. And then for the city, we get hundreds, sometimes thousands of interviews from residents that we may not have heard from otherwise, and much more in-depth. These interviews are about 10 to 15 minutes each. And many of these students are also bilingual and Hayward residents. So while that's not a requirement, many times students are interviewing family members or family friends, and they are just naturally doing it in a different language. And then those students are translating the responses back into English for city staff. I cannot recommend enough, if you are working in a local government and have a local community college within your jurisdiction, if you're not already partnering with your community college, do it. I think it's also important to remember that you don't necessarily need to be working with environmental or sustainability staff either. In this case, we're working with English professors, and it is a great partnership. We also have a 4-year university in Hayward. It's Cal State East Bay. And I also have a partnership with their public health department, where we do a very similar model, and we've done it for our environmental justice element. So the last form of communication that I wanted to kind of highlight in this presentation was we hosted focus groups, and we worked with our affordable housing provider, Eden Housing, and hosted 4 focus groups at their properties. So as kind of has been mentioned earlier today, we really try to meet our residents where they are, where they live. And overall, these focus groups were very successful. And once again, we were able to reach residents that don't normally provide feedback. I will share that some of the biggest lessons learned were, if you know that there's a large non-English speaking population, hire a translator. So as you can see, you have our flyers that we translated, but do kind of back and forth with Eden Housing property managers, we ultimately decided not to hire translators based on the RSVPs, and I would say that was a mistake. We relied on residents to translate for other residents, but if I could do this over, I would 100% hire the translator. And then incentives, we had snacks, and we provided residents $25 gift cards. Also work with whoever you're working with to figure out what those gift cards could be. We were planning on doing e-gift cards, and as soon as we got to our first property, which was a primarily senior property, we found out that very few of the seniors had email addresses, so we could not get them an e-gift card. So we very quickly pivoted. We found out that Target was the spot that they wanted to go to, so we came back with physical gift cards to give to the residents. And then just kind of, while we haven't adopted our climate action plan, environmental justice element, or safety and hazards element yet, it's going to council in December, all of the community engagement and applying of the racial equity lens has influenced our proposed plans and the policies and programs within them. So I just wanted to highlight one original proposed CAP action was to work with e-scooter or e-bike companies to bring docked e-bike share or e-scooter share to Hayward. After talking with our senior residents, we heard that these can pose a safety hazard, especially if they're not docked properly at the end. They just end up in the middle of the sidewalks. That can make seniors not be able to get around if they have mobility issues. We also heard from residents that a high priority was providing rebates and incentives over policy requirements. So now in our CAP, the kind of proposed draft language that will be going to council later this year is to partner with community organizations and local bike shops to provide rebates for low-income community members to purchase bicycles, helmets, pumps, e-bikes, e-scooters, and other related equipment. So we're really trying to listen to our residents and change policy and programs to adjust to that. And I will leave it there and have my contact information and happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. I really appreciate you sharing your inclusive and community tailored approach to communications and engagement. And I love the great ideas you brought up about meeting people where they are and having those like varied messengers. Like there's such a power to that and building that trust and credibility with your community. On that note, I want everyone on the call here, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat, and I am sure Nicole would be happy to answer any questions. But in the meantime, Nicole, I'm going to ask you a question as we have some time. So you're talking a lot about building partnerships and such, and I would love to hear from your experience of like, what are the best practices and how do you develop those partnerships with community colleges and maintain them to create such amazing products for your community?
Yeah, a lot of it is being persistent. So reaching out to those partners, being available to them. So it can't just be a one-way partnership. It can't just be me always asking them for things. When they have events, I come, I speak, I have it be mutually beneficial in that way. And also, I think showing that what they're doing, the work that they're doing is also changing city policy or programs to show that if you engage with us, we're listening to you. Because I think in a lot of times with, especially in government, we'll do outreach, but we already had the policy created. So we're taking it out, but we're kind of not necessarily always changing it based on that. So taking that information out early in the process when we can still change things and then changing things based on what we hear to show that we're listening to you, I think is really the most important part in building trust.
Absolutely. It's so key to the work that we're all doing. So thank you so much for sharing those insights. Let's see if there's any questions in the chat. No, everyone's saying thank you so much for sharing, Nicole. People really appreciate all of your amazing insights. So thank you so much. Well, to keep us on time.
If you have a question in the chat, I can answer in the chat too, but let us keep moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicole. It's just about to say that as well. So thank you. All right. Next up, we are going to start with move on to another case study, which is from Jakarta, Indonesia, and it will be a short clip from that organization.
We're actually not going to have a clip now because we did share these videos ahead of time with you, and we want you to be able to appreciate them in all of their glory. So yeah, we've shared those links at the in a email, and I just actually wanted to you can go on to the next slide, and I'm happy to talk through it. So yes, we were lucky enough to get this intervention from Asep Kuswanto, who is the head of the environmental agency at Jakarta. So really great to hear from him about the excellent climate communications campaigns that they're undertaking. So as I said, that came to you in an email form. We are going to share the links at the end of the session, but there was one particular campaign that they did that I wanted to highlight for you. So this is a public service announcement, and they do have a link to it on their Instagram account. But what I really liked about this campaign was that well, first of all, it's called the Boo Juju series, and it's a wonderful just production kind of quality, a very naturalistic production of a woman and her daughter interacting this particular episode. And what I liked about it is it's ostensibly a climate campaign. In the end, you know, they're really trying to get people to use public transportation with the impact of decreased carbon emissions from fewer cars on the road. And what they're doing is they're not mentioning climate at all. So this is a series that's about the annoyances of traffic, which is something I think everyone can relate to. And it's really starting people down at that in that audience journey that I was talking about a little bit earlier, where, you know, people may not even recognize that there's a problem. And this whole campaign is about folks recognizing that traffic is just something that they don't have to accept. And one of the ways they can get out of it is to use public transportation. And this is a very gentle nudging from a daughter to her mother about recognizing that problem. So I really liked that element of Jakarta's presentation. Again, I would urge you to look at that YouTube video that we shared. And then the other case study that we got, we can go to the next slide, is from Legazpi City in the Philippines. And we had two folks who shared with us. And we are actually going to watch, a piece of this. But first of all, we did share with you ahead of time the story of Rodrigo Abache, who is part of the City Environment and Natural Resources Office in Legazpi. And they have a really interesting story to tell about how they're building a brand of carbon-free Legazpi as an overall brand in connection to their climate action plan. So I think there'll be a lot of, in that video, a lot of kind of resonance with what Nicole was just talking about in Hayward, but from the other side of the globe. And now we're going to get to hear from Melody Azur, who's the department head of the City Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Office, who's sharing a bit of her ingredients for a communications plan, which is our next section and our final section of this session. So we're going to quickly watch that, and then I'm going to scoot through my last part of the presentation, and then we're going to send you home. So thanks for sticking it out tonight. And here is the presentation from Ms. Azur.
In preparing for a media campaign, we start with identifying the stakeholder groups, those who can affect positive change, meaning we look for our climate champions. We determine the information needs and the methods on how we will meet the knowledge needs of the users or audience. We divide the audience and tailor the messages according to their concerns or issues and their needs. This ensures the usability and relevance of the message. Framing and language are vital in reflecting the audience's knowledge and values. In Legazpi, for example, we consider the city's ethnicity in choosing the language or dialect to be used. Since our ethnicity is becoming varied, we chose to use the Filipino language, as this is the most common and easiest language to understand. We agree on common definitions of the concepts used in the material to avoid confusion. For example, the term deluyon should mean storm surge and not tsunami. Also, their indigenous knowledge can refine the messages. We tailor the message according to the gaps and issues being addressed or the objectives of the campaign. We laymanize as much as possible the technical terms using the chosen language. Of course, we are guided by the technical experts here. The messages are evidence-based as we make use of climate and data visuals and video clips and deliver the message through our favorite channels. We are currently establishing a feedback mechanism through focus group discussions to assess whether our messages are effective and responsive to the audience, so that we can later revise, redesign, or recast and improve the system.
So I think you can hear so many parallels with what Nicole just talked through, just in the Filipino context. So it's very cool to see. So again, Ms. Azur's full presentation is available, will be available in links. If you are watching the recording of this, we'll make the links available in the description, so you can be sure to see those as well. All right, so we're going to get through the final bit of the presentation today. So this is ingredients of a communications plan. So we're going to go back on the next slide to this audience journey idea. Just to remind you, if you want to skip, yep. The audience journey again is about where your audience is in relation to the problem and solution that you're offering. So are they ready to accept what you're giving them, or are they further down the journey and need to be moved along into adoption and advocacy? And I'm going to show you a bit of how that could be done using Daring Cities as an example. So Daring Cities is 4 years old now. This is the 4th edition of it. It started in 2020. Right as the pandemic hit, we were starting to make plans for a great in-person event in Bonn, and we had to pivot to a fully virtual event. So you can click to the next. So our goal was to introduce a completely new brand, an event topic, and a format to a wide audience in the city climate space and motivate them to engage in a new way. So, cast your mind back to 2020 when maybe, virtual meetings were not as common. And it was just kind of an unexpected way to engage in this space. Next click. So the audience for this was particularly local and regional governments. So obviously we have some city folks, city, town, and region folks on the call today. That's great. You found our Daring Cities somehow. And also the partners who work with them. So a broad spectrum of partners as well. So then the next part is our unique value proposition. So at the time when we first launched Daring Cities, obviously people really had their attention turned to the pandemic and the implications to the global economy, to obviously public health around the world, to just when would our lives get back to normal. And we really wanted to, make sure that we could say, cities are still in this, they're still fighting the fight on climate, and we want to make sure that their voices are heard and that we are able to advocate for what they need to get this done. The channels that we looked at were channels that we had built up. We built up partnerships with other organizations, with media outlets that would allow us to reach our target audiences, and we also used Google and other digital ads to reach our audiences. And then finally, the insights that we had was that people were hungry for ways to connect, and we could provide it through this platform. So that was those are the ingredients, the first sort of top level of our comms plan for Daring Cities. And then just to give you an idea of some of the other things that could be a part of your plan, these ingredients, you can go to the next slide. So we can include key messages. So what are the main messages that you want to get across? And you'll use that in a lot of different ways in the plan. I cannot stress how important it is to have these. It makes life so much easier when you've already agreed on what are the things you're trying to get done, because you can just come back to that. And when folks try to deviate in other directions, it's easy to point back to that agreed upon list. Next point, a list of stakeholders and partners is super important. I think sometimes it feels a little obvious. Okay, who are we gonna, pull in? Oh, it's the same departments, but I think it is important to just put those down on paper, and also potential partners who you might work with. Similarly to that, who's doing what? So who's responsible for what's going to happen, maybe needs to be consulted or informed about it. That's a good model to follow in terms of comms plans. Next point, timeline and contingencies are obviously an important part of any comms plan. So what are you when are you trying to do something by, and what depends on each other to get things done? So what's going to stop the whole process if you aren't able to move things forward? And then finally, of course, we've talked a lot about it, but what does success look like? What do you expect your results to be? What are you measuring? And sometimes this is very practical. There are things that you need to do to be able to measure certain digital outcomes, or you might decide that, for instance, knowing the breakdown of language speakers is really important to you at different workshops that you're holding. If you agree upon it ahead of time, then you know that that's going to have to be something that is incorporated into your plan for those workshops. So again, if you don't talk about it ahead of time, it doesn't get incorporated in. So those are the potential plan elements. And then just to take you through this, it's gonna be a little quick thing here. So you can click to the next. So we had basically 3 different areas that we were working in for our audience journey for Daring Cities. So we had the channels that we can control ourselves. We've heard about newsletters and social media, websites, those kinds of things for ICLEI as an organization. Then we had channels that we were building up that belong to Daring Cities, the brand. And then we had channels that belong to other people that we can't control, but we're going to try to incentivize them to work with us and promote the event. So next click, our overall goal was to get people to attend our event. So that's kind of that finish line there in adoption. Click. Then the first place we started was down at the very beginning of our journey. So what are all of the places that we owned ourselves that we could start to introduce the idea of Daring Cities? Because if you remember back in 2020, this didn't exist at all. Nobody knew what Daring Cities was. So we started with ourselves. Click. Then we started with our partners who had earned channels, were running channels themselves, where we could similarly get information about Daring Cities into the right places. Click. Then we got a little bit more into depth. So then, we've introduced the idea of Daring Cities. Now, what are some of the benefits you might get signing up for particular services like this email boot camp that was an offer that we made, and other types of content that we're going to draw people in deeper into the brand and eventually the event. Click. And all of these things led back to the Daring Cities website. And so we knew that had to be the place where people were going to land and want to partake in the event. Click. A lot of times they went from joining the website and then immediately registering for the event. Click. Sometimes they came in different ways. So to the Daring Cities newsletter and subscribed, and then click, it went to, or through social channels, and then eventually click, they went to the registration. And finally, all of those people who registered ended up, not all of them, but some number of them ended up attending the Daring Cities event. And that was how we got there. And then finally, the last piece of this is advocacy. So getting people to talk about the fact that they're attending, they're planning to attend, they're speaking at it, that Daring Cities is a great platform to learn about new topics regarding the climate emergency, just like you might do later on today when you, or if you're on social media and you connect with us on social media. So that is hopefully your audience journey reflects something like this. And we're so glad that you joined us here today. So that is the plan, ingredients of a comms plan, and I'll turn things back over to Anne Marie.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I just want to let everyone know that we really appreciate you being here and joining us today, and a big thank you to all of our speakers. And we would like to formally invite all of you to our next Darien Cities 2023 virtual formal event. It's called Sustainable and Affordable Housing for All, where we're going to dive into how local governments can decarbonize the residential building stock in a socially inclusive way. So for more information and registration link, please check out the Zoom chat. Thank you all for staying on for that extra 2 minutes. Appreciate everyone's time today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Good day, everyone. I am Roderick N. Abache from the local government unit of Legazpi City, working at the Office of the City Environment and Natural Resources here in Albay, Philippines. I will be sharing the city's experience and how our office partakes in communicating the climate change issues, as well as the ways in conveying the messages in our locality, and how local solutions can contribute to address such issues to mitigate possible adverse impacts. This presentation is entitled Carbon-Free Legazpi, Road Towards Low-Emission Development. The image on the slide is a city's advocacy logo that campaigns for low emissions development. The city's campaigns on carbon-free Legazpi is a result when the LGU Legazpi City had conducted greenhouse gas inventory in 2019 with the base year data of calendar year 2018. And also the formulation of the greenhouse gas management plan in 2020 with the technical assistance in support of various entities. Complementary to the greenhouse gas inventory report, including the greenhouse gas management plan, is the formulation of the carbon-free Legazpi information, education, and communications plan. This document provides guidance in order for the city government of Legazpi to communicate the salient information contained in the greenhouse gas inventory report and the greenhouse gas management plan to the general public. And this document paves the way for the logo and the campaign text of Carbon-Free Legazpi, as it represents the city's advocacy for low emissions development. The IEC plan has provided the city the guidance on the IEC campaign materials that have to be produced to convey climate change related information. The IEC materials would primarily be addressing the knowledge and the behavioral gaps of the intended audience towards greenhouse gas. The goal of the IEC materials is to reach the intended audiences for them to have an increased knowledge and awareness about greenhouse gas and its impacts to the environment, and to have a change in their attitude towards greenhouse gas emissions so they themselves can be part of a call to reduce cities' emissions. In addition, the main messages of the IEC materials are to give context about the greenhouse gases, to explain the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions, to determine the impact and importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and to enumerate entry points on how they can help the LGU in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The goals and the messages were supported and anchored on different research studies conducted. The suggested IEC materials were based on the science as it passed through the process or series of consultation with the key stakeholders, such as pre-testing and among others. Harnessing the current trends of online platforms, in June 2021, LGU Legazpi City launched the social media account of the Carbon-Free Legazpi. This will serve as the online platform for the city government of Legazpi to convey information and campaigns associated to climate change, a venue to call for action to curb GHG emissions, and the like. As part of the CFL advocacy, here are the IEC materials developed that were derived from the IEC plan. These include the social media cards, primarily intended for the academe and business sectors. The social media cards were posted on the Carbon Free Legazpi social media page based on the prescribed time of the day to gain more reach. Another IEC materials are the printing of brochures and pamphlets. The materials contain the information on the following. One is the discussion about global warming, greenhouse effect, and greenhouse gases. Number two, information about sectors that contribute to Legazpi City's GHG emissions. Third is the presentation of the plans and actions being done by the Legazpi City to address the problems on greenhouse gas emissions. Fourth is how business can help in lessening greenhouse gas emissions. Another is the printing of climate-related infographics in the poster-sized material to be posted in various schools. GHG awareness webinar series were also conducted to various audiences within the city to instill consciousness of the public on climate change information. Supplemental to the webinars include the conduct of GHG awareness lecture series to the students, business sectors, and village officials. To level up in relaying climate-related information and to bring inspiring stories to the public in the locality, a short local climate documentary series has been included as an additional contents of the Carbon Free Legazpi social media page, dubbed as Climaction, a climate actions documentary series that aims to amplify the practical climate actions that are habitually undertaken by Legazpeños, highlighting the impacts of climate change, provide practical solutions to reduce carbon emissions, and showcase the benefits of taking action. This video is our recent short documentary series wherein the city features the power of renewables being adopted by some individuals and organizations here in Legazpi City. Currently, Greenhouse Gas Awareness Lecture has been integrated into the regular environmental seminar activity of the City Government of Legazpi, conducted by the Office of the City Environment and Natural Resources, which is one of the requirements in obtaining local business permit by commercial or business establishments within the city prior to its operation. With this practice, this will encourage the business sector to widen their consciousness about the science of greenhouse gas and its interconnectedness to climate change and take initiative in their own little ways. That is how the city government of Legazpi, through the Office of the City Environment and Natural Resources, has taken its parts in approaching climate change within the sphere of climate communication. Have a carbon-free day, everyone. I hope I was able to share our experiences here in Legazpi City as we embark towards carbon-free Legazpi. Thank you.
I am presenting to you today our climate communications, the case of Legazpi City. Legazpi is a city belonging to the southeastern part of Luzon in the Philippines. Its location within the typhoon and seismic belts in Southeast Asia defines its exposure to multi-hazards. More than 200,000 people live in the city, and this population increases by around 30% during the day. Taking into account the city's exposure to multi-hazards and its role as the provincial center for business, education, and health, we underline the significance of communication in ensuring the safety of the people amid climate change. We use the SMART framework in setting our goals for communication. Specific, this means we address the gaps and issues regarding the city's climate campaigns. we lay out the steps to action and identify the responsibility centers. Measurable, we establish trackable benchmarks that evaluate the actionable item. We use metrics or indicators measuring the number of IEC materials distributed or the number of community members who attended the campaign. Attainable means our objectives are reasonably achievable and scalable within the scope of our goals, our resources, and the time allotted. Realistic, this shows the relevance of the campaign considering the big picture or the goal, which is, for example, climate change adaptation or reducing the risk. Time-bound, this refers to the period or deadline of the campaign, which should be clearly stated. In preparing for a media campaign, we start with identifying the stakeholder groups, those who can affect positive change, meaning we look for our climate champions. We determine the information needs and the methods on how we will meet the knowledge needs of the users or audience. We divide the audience and tailor the messages according to their concerns or issues and their needs. This ensures the usability and relevance of the message. Framing and language are vital in reflecting the audience's knowledge and values. In Legazpi, for example, we consider the city's ethnicity in choosing the language or dialect to be used. Since our ethnicity is becoming varied, we chose to use the Filipino language, as this is the most common and easiest language to understand. We agree on common definitions of the concepts used in the material to avoid confusion. For example, the term Daluyon should mean storm surge and not tsunami. Also, their indigenous knowledge can refine the messages. We tailor the message according to the gaps and issues being addressed or the objectives of the campaign. We laymanize as much as possible the technical terms using the chosen language. Of course, we are guided by the technical experts here. The messages are evidence-based as we make use of climate and data visuals and video clips and deliver the message through our favorite channels. We are currently establishing a feedback mechanism through focus group discussions to assess whether our messages are effective and responsive to the audience, so that we can later revise, redesign, or recast and improve the system. We have our favorites on the mode of distributing our messages. We have direct engagement done through research, meetings, training, and other events. Our virtual engagement constitutes social media releases. We have an official Facebook page. We use chat groups as long as there is an internet connection, and we send text messages. We also channel our messages through our webinars or online trainings. We have the audible systems used during an upcoming event or incident. We call it the ronda around the village or community. We also have customizable knowledge products in digital or hard copies of maps showing thematic layers, risk layers, hazard layers, exposed elements, critical infrastructure, and the like. We have brochures and flyers detailing info on hazards and instructions on what to do before, during, and after the onset of a certain hazard in the Filipino language. Of course, we also have these brochures in English. Signages are installed in strategic and convergence areas, showing information about a hazard, color-coded warnings, or routes for evacuation. The most effective and commonly used mode in distributing the IEC materials or relaying messages is the direct engagement. Let me finish this presentation with a quote from John Powell: "Communication works for those who work at it." Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Master Kuswanto, the head of Jakarta Environment Agency, that responsible for environmental issues in Jakarta province. As we all know, the world is now facing climate change that need attention and strategic actions. One of the most strategic ways to address this issue is through good communication, understanding that knowledge is the catalyst for transformative change. I'm very honored to have an opportunity to share Jakarta's climate change communication action based on our experience. Okay, let me to explain my presentation. Since 2012, Jakarta has been doing various efforts regarding climate action comprising mitigations and adaptation. Those refer to two climate plans, which are Regional Action Plan for GHG emission reduction and climate adaptation. Currently, DKI Jakarta would like to accelerate its climate action toward global commitment of net zero emission in 2050. Jakarta has also enacted Governor Regulation number 90/2021 on climate resilient regional low carbon development plan regarding action plan for achieving our ambitious commitment in contributing the Indonesian National Determined Contribution or NDC. Talking about journey and effort in combating this challenge, Jakarta has shown an excellent track record for their sustainability of becoming a climate resilient city as demonstrated on this roadmap. The roadmap shows Jakarta was officially joined as one of the 40 city network in 2007 and recently planning to enhance NDC with the aim for net zero emission in 2060. Next slide. To achieve the goals, Jakarta government has developed climate action plan, which consists of climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. As you can see, there are 5 sectors and 11 actions for the climate change mitigation, and 7 sectors and 11 actions for climate change adaptation. Okay, next slide. As a matter of fact, Jakarta has reduced GHG emission up to 26.9% and reached a wide range of emission milestones in 2021. It was all achieved by enhancing collaboration with all stakeholders and promoting action communication. Climate actions communication has many purposes, as you can see on the slide. The main purpose is to matching the narrative of the DKI Jakarta Provincial Government Program regarding climate change mitigation and adaptation. We also need to raise public awareness regarding public transportation, energy saving, and waste management. The target audience are Jakarta Provincial Government internal, such as government employee, local state enterprises and the families. For stakeholders are community, academic, students, NGOs, experts, observers, religious leaders, and entrepreneurs. For residents, the target are residents with the Jakarta ID card and non-Jakarta ID card residents who carry out activities in Jakarta. And for netizen, are social media users. And for mass media, include print, online, and TV and radio. Next slide. One of our campaign named Jaga Jakarta dengan Hemat Energi to encourage people to save the city by saving the energy. Jakarta has activity target divided into 5 quarters with various key messages to convey. In one quarter, focus on government internalization. In quarter 2, focuses on transportation energy saving campaign. And in quarter 3, talks about the energy saving in household sector campaign. And lastly, in quarter 4, focuses on smart waste campaign. Next slide. There are a variety of ways to promote and communicate the climate action to the community, such as through social media and multi-channel content, which can be useful, especially in this the recent year. The multi-channel content shall consist of social media, outdoor media, media shopping, website, and etc. On social media, we can do some supporting activities, such as using share hashtag and collaborating the content with the collaborators or KOLs. And through article, we can make informative and persuasive presentation, publish the information on mass media, online discussion forum, and use quotes from expert sources who are pro-reaction. And next slide. This is the communication and promotion of this climate action change can be delivered to several ways, such as Ikhtiar Jakarta and Jakarta Rendah Emisi. Next slide. And this is furthermore, infographic can also be the way to spread the communication and promotion, as it tends to be more eye-catching and more informative. And the next slide. Social media may be the most popular platform used for the spreading the communication of the climate change, since nowadays people always use social media almost every day. Instagram is one of platforms that we use to campaign in the climate actions. And last but not least, we also spread the communication through the short program called the series by Bu Juju. With this program, we can attract more people and make them interested in the issues. For example, we start by describing how frustrating it is when people stuck in the traffic jam. We lead people to realize that they have alternatives. In the end, we conclude that by using public transportation somehow can lead to more peaceful situation. As we draw the curtain of this enlightening journey through tools of climate action communication, it's clear that we stand at a crossroads in history. The choices we make today will echo for generations to come. On behalf of our team, we extend our heartfelt gratitude for your time and engagement. Together, we have explored the limitless potential action to solve climate issues. And now it's up to each one of us to make it a reality. Let's embark on this journey, not as mere spectators, but as active participants in achieving climate resilient city. Thank you. May the future be brighter and greener for all.